I come from the Gapminder Foundation, and it's a small foundation that we founded in 2005, and we're based in Stockholm in Sweden. And we try to fight devastating ignorance to promote the fact-based worldview that everyone can understand, because that is very important, not only to strive to find the facts, but also to make it easy to understand, because without that, it doesn't really help that we have the facts if no one gets what they are saying. And these are us, so it's Ola, Hans, and me. And usually I have as a disclaimer, I have to say, when I was a kid and I was thinking about what I wanted to do in life, I had my dream thing was to be independent, being an artist, never marry, because I thought that was ridiculous, and I did not plan to get any kids at all. That was my initial plan. I was going to be very independent, and And then, unfortunately, I met Ola when I was 16 at the high school. So already there it started to go downwards with my cool plans. And then we married very young for no particular reason, which was also a bit weird. And now we have 3 kids, and I spent my whole work life working together with Ola and Hans, which is my father-in-law. Now, unfortunately, he passed away a few years back, but that did not go as I planned. But the thing is that I started actually to educate myself to become a photographer, and like an artist photographer. But then Ola's father, who was very talkative, he started complaining about things he thought were complicated at work, because he was training medical students, and he wanted them to get a worldview, very easily. So he didn't want to spend time on telling them everything about the world. So he tried to simplify, and he had a lot of frustrations around that. And we couldn't start but helping him, because it was very fun trying to solve those more visual parts of the problem. So we started helping him out doing that. So that was the whole starting point, and then we have been working together since. And this is what we've been working on, basically trying to bring this kind of material into something more digestible. And in the beginning, we have been doing these kinds of animating bubble charts. We've been doing animating income mountain kind of visualizations. We have been working on trying to make Google search handle public data more easily. We've been doing documentaries, and we have been doing like physical teaching materials for classrooms. And while we were doing that, sometimes we were approached by people saying, especially to Hans, because he was sort of the one doing all that, because me and Ola were more staying at home, inventing the tools and ideas visually. And he was approached several times for people asking, shouldn't you write a book? And we were all saying, like, no way. Books, that's so old-fashioned. No one uses books anymore. We work with the new modern, interactive computer softwares and free information online and all that. So we were actually refusing to write a book for quite a while. But we had a gradual frustration growing, and we sort of felt that it's like people don't get what we're trying to say. And then suddenly we started realizing, might be because we never wrote it down. There is no book. No one can read what we actually wanted to say. And we started realizing maybe we should write a book. Maybe a book is the thing, right? So we decided to do that finally. And we started the writing process. And initially we were talking to the editors, and we were saying, we're going to write the book in a voice of 3, because we're 3 people who are going to write the book together. First of all, you can see it's a big name and 2 small names. We had a long struggle, because the publishers, of course, they didn't want me and Ola at all. And Hans said, I'm never going to do this unless we write it, the 3 of us. And finally, they managed to squeeze it in as small as possible. And we have been fighting for months to get it that big, And then we were saying, we're going to write in the voice of 3. And the editor said, don't do it. You can't do that. And we're going to do that. And we started writing. And it was horrible to read. So we had to give up, actually, because it didn't work. Because when we were using the word we, for instance, what did we mean? Did we mean one Hans and Ola, or Hans and me, or Hans, Ola and me and Ola, or the world, or, it was totally impossible to read. So we gave up. So now it's a book written mostly in the voice of Hans. Yeah. So now you know that. That's sort of the practical struggles behind it. So we started writing the book, and we were planning to have a 2-year writing process together. And we had just started, and we had sort of the idea was already in place, but we hadn't really started writing. And then just in the beginning, Hans started to feel ill, and he went to the doctors, and they found out that he had a pancreatic cancer, and it had a very bad diagnosis. So he had somewhere between a few weeks and maybe a year to live. And initially, we were thinking that we were going to start by, writing the fact part of the book first and finding the bow of the book and so forth. But we had to rethink, because when Hans was ill, we soon imagined, or we realized that me and Ola, we can finalize the data, we can finalize the visualizations, we can finalize the fact parts, but we had decided that we, in each chapter, would actually have a big chunk based on experiences from Hans's life, where we were using his own mistakes, you could say, to sort of illustrate different things in the chapters. And we realized that, of course, we have heard the stories over and over again from throughout his life, but when you just hear them, you don't really pay attention to whether it's like 1979, 1982, or maybe 1992. And was it Togo or was it Kenya? Those kinds of practical details. So what we started doing then was actually interviewing and tape record a lot of conversations with Hans, where we basically interviewed him about all these practical events in his life. And we did it for 2-3 weeks. And, I don't know if we did it for 100 hours or something. And then quite soon, in the end of that process, he started to go on repeat. So when Ola was listening at the end, and he got so bored of hearing the stories again, so he started doing other things sometimes and just putting the phone there, and sometimes say, aha, and then he put it down. And then we started realizing that at this point, I think we're sort of done. We have what we need. And then we actually, Hans started to feel better, and we got a full year of actually more or less putting the whole book together. And then when Hans passed, the final year, me and Ola spent on trying to adjust all the different aspects so it became more stable. Because before, everything was sort of in place, but it was not something that was digestible and easy to read. It was, not in shape yet. So that was the writing process for the book. And honestly, now when we have a book, I can't understand why we never wrote it before, because a book is pretty cool, right? So now I have to say, I've read a lot, so I can't understand why I couldn't imagine that we would write a book, but for some reason I couldn't. But now when we have the book, I sort of consider it being a piece of rocket science. You can bring it, you can do things in it, you can go through it, and you can remember things. So yeah, so maybe the book was the right thing to do. And the book, we start with actually asking 13 fact questions about the world. Because what we started to realize in the previous 15 years we were working together was, it seems like people we talk to, they don't really seem to learn, even if we present the facts. And we started thinking, why don't they? Or what do they know about the world? And we started realizing that most likely people are a bit ignorant about their own ignorance, because everyone thinks that they know what the world is like. And when you think you already know something, it's very hard to relearn, because why should you relearn when you already know something, right? And we started to actually, by doing these kinds of different fact questions, to measuring what people knew about different things, to get an idea. And the questions you got to answer are the same questions as in the beginning of the book. And the first question here is, global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will get warmer, stay the same, or get colder. As you can see, we're not asking what you think or what you personally believe. We ask what does the group of climate experts, what seems to be the consensus at this point in time. And get warmer, most would probably agree that that is what the community are saying at the moment. And we were asking this to representative samples of people in 14 countries. And this is what it looks like. And you can see here, maybe not the most impressive position, but still, it's actually, I would say, even though it might be disturbing to be at the bottom, but still, it's sort of a communication success that so many people seem to actually know what is going on in the debate about the climate. People seem to be aware. It has actually come through. And what about you here? Are you feeling the pressure? Do you think you're better than the general public in Australia? Yes. Yes, you are. So you're actually better than everyone else here, beating Hungary, Norway, and Finland as well. These huge countries, right? But the thing is, when we move to other questions about the world, we don't get those kinds of impressive results. So to take an example, how many of the world's one-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? 20, 50, or 80%? 80, correct? It's actually even 88, but we round it downwards, so no one can say that we try to exaggerate. And this is the results now. And we have Sweden at the top, but still it's not that impressive. And here you can see 14% got this. And 14% is not that much, right? And just think now, if we would have asked the same questions to the chimps at the zoo and giving them the three alternatives, A, B, or C, they would sort of, by just random picking, end up here. And this is what the book is all about, actually. Because when we ask anything that is not a negative question, when it comes to people tend to be pretty good answering things becoming worse. But as soon as something has become a positive trend, we see pretty bad results. And this, just imagining if people wouldn't have read the question, but just picking A, B, and C without knowing what the question would be about, statistically, they would actually have ended up almost, at this line. So the interesting part here, I would say, is we live in a knowledge society being bombarded by information all the time. We are finally measuring what's going on all around the world. The information is available to almost everyone. We're actually extremely intelligent and highly educated. And still, we would have been better off without even reading the question. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? Something is going on here. So what do you think here? Do you think you're still going to be 95% correct? You see the pattern, right? It doesn't look that promising. So the question now would be, would you manage to beat sort of random? Or, let's see. Yeah, it's hard to know whether you should be glad or sad, right? But it's at least much better than the general public in Australia, and I guess that's what counts, right? So I think it's pretty good, right? So you got 40% on this question. We have asked it in several different audiences, and just so that you can compare your 40% correct on the vaccination question, World Health Summit, nope, 27% got it right. Davos, 18% got it correct. There is a meeting where Nobel laureates in medicine meet with young, promising medical researchers, and you could think that maybe they, as they are in medicine, should get this correct. And I saved the best one for last. This is the reason why I say one of the 5 largest banks is because they were smart enough to actually ask us to sign an NDA before not disclosing who they were. So we did. But you can still, it was in London, I can tell you, the meeting. 4% got it correct. And I mean, of course, of course, it's not like a banker needs to know everything about vaccination in the world. But it's interesting because vaccination, if 88% of the kids get vaccinated globally, that means you have infrastructure, you have roads in place, you have information in place, mothers who can read and write and get the kids to the right place at the right time. You have cold chains so you can get the medication all the way to the people who needs the vaccination. A lot of things are going on, and I would just imagine that most likely those banks, if they are not really aware about that, most likely they're going to sort of probably not do all their decisions in the most efficient way, maybe. So we were asking these questions in 14 countries to representative samples, and you could get between 0 and 12 correct answers because we actually removed the climate question, the 13th question, because we used that more like a, I don't know the word in English, but you know, we use it as a question where we show that the results are completely different from all the other questions, because on the climate most people get it right. So these are all the other questions without the climate one. 15% got 0, and just imagining you have 12 questions, A, B, C, getting 0 is pretty impressive. I mean, you not managing to get a single one correct. It's a bit depressing maybe, but it's still, I think it's fascinating. And this is how the results were shaped. And this is where you would end up without reading the questions, just picking randomly. One person got 11, that was a Swede, we don't know who, and no one got 12. So, I mean, it's not that we think that everyone needs to learn everything about the world, by heart, because that wouldn't make sense, but it is an indication that we're definitely not getting this correct. And we're not trying to trick people with these questions. I mean, they're general fact questions. And it's not that we believe that people could know all of them. It's just that we've seen when people are guessing, they are doing it in a systematic way, so we can more or less know how they're going to guess, because people have an overdramatic worldview, and when you're trying to guess with an overdramatic worldview who guides you, then it's pretty predictable how you will guess, right? So here, 10% were better than the chimps, and that's not very impressive, maybe. Actually, we were contacted by a chimp researcher who was surprised when we said ABC on the bananas, because he said, that wouldn't be random. I'm surprised. Usually, chimps go for the outer alternatives. I forgot to say, we need to mix the bananas between the questions or something, yeah. So what about you then? No pressure. How do you think it went? Do you think you have a better... Yeah? You still have some representation down here, but it's not as bad, right? It's better. You agree? Yeah? So 38% better. So you can see it's actually a much better shape, but it's still room for improvement is the polite way of putting it, I guess. So this was how you did on the different questions, and you can see the climate, life expectancy, extreme poverty, you did pretty well, and then there were a few others where it didn't go as well. So here is a YouGov is a like online polling institution, and they were asking the general public in several countries this question: do you think on the whole the world is getting better or worse? Which is of course a bit strange question, because everyone will put different contents into the getting better or worse. But just look here, 3% thought the world was getting better. And just imagine when you're about to guess and only 3% think something is getting better, of course you will go for the worst of alternatives when you're guessing, right? So we created actually this 32 charts of things that has actually improved over time, just to remind people that we tend to miss slow positive changes. And the red ones are bad things decreasing, and the green ones are good things increasing, right? Pretty simple. So I will show you a few of them. Slavery, back in the year 1800, it was legal almost all over. Now it's only 3 countries that still thinks that's a good idea. Deaths from disaster, it's less likely to die in the disasters. Lead in gasoline is almost abandoned in all countries. Fewer children are dying before the age of 5. It's less likely to die in plane crashes. We have more movies to choose from, which pretty boring to go to the movies in 1906. Then we have more kids being immunized than in 1980. We have more music to choose from. And we have actually a bigger portion of the world being protected nature. So a lot of things. This doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that everything is going good, because we have a lot of problems still that we have to deal with. But it's very easy to forget about these slow positive trends that we don't think about. Because when we look out the window, we can't see these kinds of global trends. We basically can't see it. And if we're reading reports, they are usually very specific into a very, siloed, small topic, and it's hard to get the proportions right. And if we look at TV or reading the news, we will hear about disasters and wars, refugee crises, diseases, paradises, cute animals, and exotic cultures. And nothing wrong with anything of that. But when we see all these images and we put them together, we create a worldview based on extraordinary events. And it's even if they are not lying, any one of them, it makes the world a bit weird, right? So to understand the world, we should think about it. I know, usually we're seldom here, right? But we have gotten a few angry emails over the time, people saying like, how could you call this Asia, right? But that's the freedom of being a small non-profit, that we decided that it's easier. It's ridiculous with too many areas because people can't remember, and we decided to divide like this. I'm sorry. So, looking at the world population, there are 7 billion people today, 1 billion in Americas, 1 in Europe, 1 in Africa, and 4 in Asia, including Australia and New Zealand, right? So this is what the world population looks like. We need these kinds of very simple frameworks to understand the world around us. So to remember the world, we can think of it as a PIN code, 1114, 1114, right? Pretty easy. But when we move forward in time, of course it will change. And according to the UN population experts, this is what's going to happen first. The population will grow, both in Asia and Africa, and then moving further into the future, it will continue to grow even more. But it will not happen anything. It will actually almost decrease in both Europe and Americas a bit, right? And if we think about this part of the world, it will be 8% of the world population in year 2100. Of course, everything will be around here. So I think the most important thing, thinking about the future population, is especially in Europe and in North America, it's time to be a little bit more humble, because in every single case where there might be some kind of democracy in voting situation, it will be pretty hard to, with 8% of the world population, to actually, get some voices through, right? Here we can see, this is actually the world, still you can see colored here. So it's how many people, the shape of the mountain is where people live, and the size is how many people there are. And you can see, back in the year 1800, the majority of the world population were actually living in extreme poverty, as we know it today. And when we move forward over time, we can see what has happened to humanity. First, we see the population is growing, and then we can see how Europe and Americas are actually moving first out of extreme poverty. You can see the Asian population growing fast, and then we here see a very divided worldview. But look what's happening now with Asia, how it's catching up and how the gap is actually disappearing over time. And I think it's important to see this, to realize that the world is actually in constant change and it's actually moving here. We can still see, some people are saying, yes, but you still have the same amount of people living in extreme poverty, and that's true. So, I mean, it's not to say that everything is perfect, because we have a huge part of the world population still in extreme poverty, a huge number, and that's not okay, of course. But looking to the proportions, we can see how the movement is actually to get out of the extreme poverty, which is a pretty neat thing, right? And we can see what's happened here as well. So here we can see all the countries of the world. The size is the population. Each bubble is a country. And we can see this is the world today, as we know it. And we will have Australia here up in the upper corner here. Where? Here. We can see a life expectancy of 83 years and being pretty rich. So basically being in this corner is being healthy and rich, while being in that corner is being poorer with lower life expectancy. And we can see here, for instance, Central African Republic, you have a life expectancy of 52, while up here, Australia, 83 almost. So we can see how the world is divided. If we go back in time, you see, back in year 1800, there were no countries actually living on the same income level as the worst off countries today. So let's see what has happened over time. Soon Australia will pop in as well, and you will see how it draws line over time. You can see time is ticking. You see the countries are bubbling up here. And then here comes Australia. And you can see how it's actually improving in life expectancy and income, and how it's moving slowly here towards richer and healthier. First it was just improving in health, and now it's following the same paths as most of the other countries. So seeing this is the most important thing is to see that the world is constantly moving. So learning the world by heart will not really do. We need to have these basic frameworks, and we need to have methods of actually finding how we can update our knowledge. So let's see here. We can also look at the world as a street. Here we see a street. We have the poorest to the left, richest to the right, and everyone else in between. This is also the 7 billion people of the world, imagining the world as a street. And we asked, actually, based on this simple image, we asked students in Sweden where they think they belong. And they usually say here. While just by living in Sweden, you most likely belong to the richest billion, even if you're a middle-income Swede or a low-income Swede. Because this is where the Swedish population is mostly. You might find a few out there on the next figure as well. But it's interesting, you watch TV, you see extraordinary events, you think you're in the middle of the world income distribution while you're at top. And I mean, how can you understand the world then? You look out the window and you see nothing of what's going on a global scale. So what we tried to do, we started a project called Dollar Street. And what we tried to do in that one is actually to give some light on human living conditions that are sort of the everyday life. And I'm just going to show you briefly. So let's see. You can see the street at the top. It says families in the world by income. So we have poorer families to the left, richer to the right, and a gradual improvement in this end. And they are not ordered by country, but by income. And we have created an income index to figure out where they belong. And what we can do now is that we can go here and we can actually visit their houses. So we can go here and click beds, for instance, because we have been sending out photographers, and they have been taking the same photos in each and every home in a systematic way. So then we can just click beds, and we can see the differences of beds on different income levels, to just get an idea about everyday life, what it actually looks like. Because we're so used to see the media image of extreme events, or sort of the commercial image of these very, styled environments. But just what does everyday life look like? And remember the Swedish students who said they thought they were in the middle of the world income distribution? We can zoom into the middle by just dragging these sliders. And the good thing now is that we can show this to the students and say, is this what your bedroom looks like? And a typical Swedish student would probably say no. We can slide it downwards, and they would not recognize their bedroom standard here either. Or we can go upwards. And now it starts to look like a typical Swedish bedroom. But as you can see, these are bedrooms from Netherlands, Jordan, Brazil, Kenya, India, Italy, Mexico, China, Nepal, Romania, and so on. But it looks pretty much the same, doesn't it? Because we are in the same income bracket. We can go now, that's the good thing with defining your own projects, because you can add what you like, and toilets is the obvious one, because of course you want to know what bathrooms look like in normal homes all over. And we can see here there seems to be a preference for white porcelain water flushing toilets, sometimes with decoration of some color, People seem also to like to have rooms where you can actually have privacy and easy to, you see, not very, people seem to have sort of the same ideas. But moving down here, we can do like this. Zooming out, so we actually look at the whole world, we will get another image. And it's pretty good to actually get the overview and seeing the scope, because we very seldom see that. We usually see one image at a time and hear a story about it. But seeing the proportion and getting it in context can be pretty good. But we can also look at functions like toothbrushing. We start at the richer end. See plastic toothbrushes with toothpaste all over. Going downwards, people are doing it the same way everywhere. Until they get to the poorer end, and they can no longer afford not a single plastic toothbrush. So instead, they will start using their finger or a stick or something. So you could actually say on this part of the road, people have their own toothbrushes. And up here, everyone has their special choices, child toothpaste and stuff like that. Down here in the middle, then you will see families sharing a toothbrush. And at that end, you don't have toothbrushes at all. So in Dollar Street, this image is tagged not only as a wall, but also as toothpaste, because that is how it's being used. I got this in my mailbox. Maybe someone recognizes the guy. And the good thing with this clip was, of course, that I was happy to get it. It's Bill Gates brushing his teeth. So that was very fun. The bad thing was actually that he screwed up the scale, and I still haven't figured out how to handle it. So you can see how I put his house here. So, and we have been calculating, just all of us understand that this house should be like a bit further this direction. But we will figure out something how to visualize that. We haven't really solved that yet. So we can see now in sort of the normal income distribution of the US, it's going to be somewhere here in the upper end of the street. And we can zoom in a bit. And we have visited a home in the richer end, the richest 20%, the Howards. This is their home. And we visited another family in the lower end, the Hadleys. And we can look at their cutleries and immediately see the difference, right? How we go from how the standard is increasing with the income. It's not rocket science, but here we add another family in the middle, and we can see the gradual change. A small plastic box with some cutleries in, a wooden drawer specifically made for cutlery, and a wooden drawer with wooden drawers within it, right? We can look at kitchen sinks, living rooms, and so forth, and see the gradual change within a country. We can do the same in China. We have visited 3 families here on different incomes. We can look at their houses, their sofas, and their stoves. And I think the interesting part here is that we very often, when we talk about other countries and other cultures, we tend to say how they are doing things in a certain country or in a certain culture. But in Dollar Street, when you start looking at the imagery, of course it will depend on what income bracket you are in, how you're going to solve it. So the cool thing is when we start comparing, here we have 2 homes, neighbors at Dollar Street, but not in reality. And look into their bedrooms. Looks pretty much the same. Both have brown leather sofas and similar play structures, both made in China, of course. And then we can go to the other end. We have 2 families, neighbors at Dollar Street, not in reality. Similar roofs, similar sofas. They are storing grains identically. Both was going to have fish for dinner that day, and they're boiling their water in identical manners. So I think it's interesting when we use photos as data and we look at everyday life, we can see that the cultural differences that we usually think about, they sort of disappear. Because of course, if you're in that income bracket, you're trying to boil your water as efficient as you can with the money you can spend, and it will be about the same solution that you will use. Doesn't have much to do with culture. Most likely this is the most durable and cheap way of doing it, right? Having a tripod and so forth. Yeah. So in Dollar Street, the world doesn't look like the world we see in the news, right? And sometimes people say to me, isn't it unnecessary to go out and basically send out photographers to home and do this systematic documentation? Why don't you just Google it? So just to remind you, this is toilet, Googling toilet, bed, and stove. It's not that those images are lying, it's just that they will show what the richest 10% either have or aspire to get. And the problem is that in our minds, when we see loads and loads of these images, we start to think it's representative, which it's not, right? So to understand the world, we recommend, this is one of the key concepts in the book actually, to think of the world as 4 income levels. Here, same 7 billion people, and this is how they are divided on the income levels. And level 1 is basically extreme poverty, and then a gradual up here, and we are at level 4 here. So to understand what it looks like on these 4 different income levels, we can look at transportation. Level 1, most likely you have to walk. Level 2, you probably have access to a bike if you're getting somewhere. Level 3, access to a motorbike. And level 4, access to a car. I mean, roughly, so we can get an idea about how people live. So we can see the majority lives on a bike level, while we are up here. And we can see the same with food, how we go from being malnourished up to having all these different choices that we tend to have up here on level 4, where we tend to eat different things, the different meals a day, and we try to change between the days what we're eating. And if we're feeding our kids the same food 2 days in a row, we're a bit worried they will get malnourished, which is maybe an exaggeration. So if we look at the world population then, this is how it has developed over time, and this is what UN experts believe will happen until year 2100. So it will basically continue to increase, and most likely it will flatten off. It might continue, I mean, it's a forecast is a forecast, but some forecasts are easier to do, and population are pretty easy to do, as it's a very slow change, because you have whole generations of a lot of years, right? This is how it's going to happen. So according to these forecasts, the amount of children is not going to grow. So how can a population grow if there is not going to be more children? It's not very obvious. But we try to explain it like this. So this is the same world population, the 7 billion, and instead of, we try to look at them as living on different levels in a house. So you go in 15-year segments, right? Throughout life cycle, you can say you're born and then you get old. And this is the population today. And you can see it's bigger generation down here than it is up there. And what's going to happen now? First, sadly, the old ones die. The other ones grow up like that. And now, 15 years later, there will be 1 more billion. The population pyramid is not getting wider down here. It's just that we're filling up these empty floors. Moving to the future, we're 9 and 10. And also, population will get a bit older, so we also need to add 1 billion here due to getting older. But this is roughly what's going to happen. And then, according to the population experts' forecasts, what's going to happen then is basically that the population will continue more or less like this without neither growing or shrinking that much. It's hard to know exactly if it's going to be like this, but roughly, this is what's going to happen. So if we look now, today, if we break down these 7 figures into more detailed views, we can see that the majority of the world population today are Asians living on level 2. And if we do a short forecast into 2040, assuming that the trends for population and income will continue as today, which we don't know, but assume that, most likely this is what we're going to see. Where we can see that the majority will then actually be on level 3, and the number living on level 1 will be fewer. So this is sort of the overall concept, and this is what we've been working on for so long, trying to find ways of making global public statistics understandable and digestible. But to beat the chimp then, what do we need? Yeah, first of all, we do need to have facts and frameworks, because without that, it's pretty hard to guess, right? But most of all, we probably need to control our instincts, because with an overdramatic worldview, it will lead us wrong most of the time. So we created the 10 rules of thumb in Factfulness. So the book is divided into 10 chapters, 1 chapter per instinct, and I'm going to go through them briefly. First, we have the gap instinct, that we tend to hear stories where we have conflicts and extremes fighting, like poor and rich, for instance. But every time we hear stories like that, we should remember to locate the majority, because to understand the world, it's useless to learn about the outliers. We need to see what the majority is doing, because otherwise we will not get it. We hear a lot about negativity. It's just getting worse. We hear it all the time. Then we should remind ourselves, would an improvement get publicity? Most likely not. We never see this. Yesterday, all trains were on time again, right? That's not the logic. So we can remind us, or the timetable is slightly improved. I mean, that's not how it's working, right? And then we have the straight line instinct, that when we see a line like that, our brains will fill it in, because we think we see that this is what's going to happen. Then it's just as a reminder, we need to control ourselves and add to our thinking to say, many lines bend. I mean, it's very rough, but it's at least a starting point, that not everything will be linear. That's good enough to start with. Then we have the fear instinct, that we hear a lot of stories driven by fear. And we need to calculate the risks, right? When we see spiders, a lot of people are freaking out, while it's usually traffic, right? That is the dangerous thing in most cases. We have the size problem. We hear a lot about huge problems, but we need to remember to compare and divide. So here, for instance, we have, this is a number from the UNICEF. In year 2016, 4,489,000 infants died. Horrible number. But 2015, it was worse. And 1950, it was much worse. So to understand if the number 2016, how we should feel about it, we need to compare it with something. And it's still, the number 2016 is still very bad, but it's better than it used to be. And keeping those two thoughts in our mind at the same time, it can be bad but better at the same time. We need to remember that. And then we have the generalization instinct. We are very fast at grouping things. And sometimes we do it in a bad way, right? Especially groups of people we're pretty fast at, right? So, for instance, when we see these images, most of us have seen them quite a lot, right? How migrants are coming over the oceans, risking their lives to get to better places. Now we have had a lot of people coming to Europe, trying to survive over the waters, and we tend to think that they are they are all the same in the boat, but of course they come from many different places with many different stories. One of the boats accidentally ended up here, I read in the paper, on a nudist beach at Gran Canaria in Spain. And I'm just imagine you're risking your life, getting into a dangerous boat, crossing the ocean because you have a dream about a better life, and you come ashore, you survived, and this is what you see. I don't know, were they warned? And I live in Europe, and I become a bit worried as well that their first impression of Europeans, it will take a time to break that and say, not everyone are pink with glasses and hats walking around naked all the time on the beach, right? Yeah. And then we have the destiny instinct. It will always be like this. We tend to think that countries and cultures and people are static, but most things are changing, but it's just that it's going slowly, so we don't see it. And we tend to be driven by our own ideologies and stuff. Of course, it's better to get different tools. We love to blame people because it's very easy. As soon as we start blaming, the problem is that we stop thinking. And maybe the last one, the urgency instinct, that we tend to feel that it's now or never, and we're emotionally driven and we want to do big changes immediately. Problem is that when we're making big decisions while we are emotional, there's a huge risk that we make bad decisions. So then we can remind ourselves that often we can take one step at a time. At the time, we don't have to do these huge steps, and it's probably better to wait until we are a bit more less emotional before we make these big decisions. So, of course, this was a very simplistic way of going through the book, but we tried to write the book as a handbook. So at the end of each chapter, we have a ridiculous bullet point list, so you can go back and see for each instinct what you should remember to think about, right? And these are just like a small fraction of that. But when we wrote it, for us it was very important to write a book where you didn't necessarily have to be extremely interested in global public health or extremely interested in cognitive psychology, but trying to write something where you could get enough insights about the limitations of our thinking and enough insights about the big global trends to actually get it somewhat correct. So maybe when we see the news, maybe we should do as we do with cigarettes, to remind ourselves that it usually takes us, into this very overdramatic thinking. And if you do the same test as you did here, again, you can go to our website and actually do it and redo it until you get all correct of the 13 questions. And when you do that, when you get every question correct, then we ask you for your email. And if you write your email, you will get your own diploma with your own name. And I promise, we don't know who you are until you decide to write your name. And that's only when you actually passed everything. So you don't have to feel embarrassed when you're struggling and you get these 2 correct or 4 correct and so forth. Sometimes people say, but isn't it like cheating that you can just do it over and over again? But I don't think so. That's learning, right? You're repeating like you did with grammar So we have actually been visiting different areas, different parts of society. We've been in the media. These are one of the TV stations in Sweden where they have their news, and we actually had a workshop with the TV presenters, and they did very bad on these questions first. We had a workshop, and then they actually made it, and we could certify the TV presenters. We've been to classrooms. We've been talking to a lot of teachers and students all over the world to make sure that they also became certified. Last week, we had one of the biggest law firms in Sweden, where actually every single employee is now actually has passed the test. And we have a social entrepreneurship hub who has started to, when people are applying for a job, they are actually asking not only for the resume, but also that they can show the diploma. Because for some reason they feel it's a good idea that their employees know at least, a little bit more than the GIMP on these questions. And that I think it's pretty decent in a knowledge society, right? So one of the things we're planning to do next is actually to do a lot of these different tests. So we're now, since September, we have tested over 1,000 fact questions in different topics. So we're now trying to build these different test modules. So we want people to, it should be easy and fast to sort of get the general pieces together in different areas. And if you want to know something more or have any questions beyond today, I would recommend you send them to info@gapminder.org or anna@gapminder.org. And if you want to use the tools I was showing, you can find them on gapminder.org, and that's also where you can do the test. You will see it on the top of that page. And if you want to see more homes or look at everyday life, you go to dollarstreet.org. And today we don't have any homes from here. So if you feel that we should have a representative sample of homes from Australia, please join us, because it's actually possible to volunteer homes. We would love that. Thank you.